Deion Sanders always believed his son could lead an NFL franchise. But for much of the media, that faith was used against Shedeur Sanders, as if being raised by a Hall of Famer made him entitled, not prepared. That narrative collapsed the moment the Browns didn't just start him, they built around him. And when Cris Carter offered a direct, unqualified apology, it wasn't just,
"If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed."
It cracked open the mythology of what makes a quarterback ready. In that crack, a deeper truth emerged. Evaluating leadership, intelligence, and toughness takes more than combined drills. Sanders didn't outperform expectations, he exposed the poverty of them. His rise is forcing the league to confront how cultural bias masquerades as analysis, and how easy it is to miss greatness when you only measure it in inches and seconds. This isn't just a quarterback story. It's a turning point. It's one thing to be doubted by fans. That's expected. It's part of the job. But when one of the most respected voices in football says, on air, that you're basically not built for the league, that's a different level of disrespect. And that's exactly what Shedeur Sanders dealt with. Cris Carter called it early, said Shedeur was a fifth-round talent at best. Questioned his mental toughness. Questioned his background. Questioned his ability to lead. He went beyond mechanics. This wasn't about footwork, it was about credibility. And that stuck. Because when someone like Carter speaks, it sets a tone. Other analysts follow. Fans parrot it. Teams hear it. The whole narrative shifts. Suddenly, Shedeur's every move was framed in contrast to that assessment. If he had a good game, it was surprising. If he showed confidence, it was cocky. If he showed composure, it was well coached, never innate, never enough. But now, all those critiques are crumbling under the weight of actual performance. The Browns didn't just name Sanders QB1. They fired Kevin Stefanski, overhauled the coaching staff, and built an entirely new offensive scheme tailored to Sanders' skill set. That's not a promotion. That's a full-on franchise reset. That's how you treat your guy. Not a placeholder, not a prospect, but a franchise quarterback. And all of this happened without Sanders engaging in theatrics. No subtweets. No passive-aggressive interviews. No branding blitz. Just football. Just steady, controlled execution that made all the talking points look outdated. Every throw, every audible, every pocket read chipped away at the old image of what a real quarterback looks like. By the time Carter apologized, it wasn't just overdue, it was the only logical move left. Because the Browns' decision forced everyone's hand. You can't argue he's not ready when a team is firing their coach to make room for him. You can't call him system-dependent when the system was built around him. You can't call him overhyped when he silenced every critic through performance, not PR. What made Carter's reversal matter is that it wasn't hedged. He didn't say, "I underestimated him." He said, "I was wrong." He admitted he got caught up in the wrong metrics. That he failed to see Sanders' leadership, football IQ, and command. And when someone who once dismissed you takes that public of a loss, it reverberates. It sends a message to everyone still holding on to outdated frameworks. That maybe it's not about arm strength anymore. Maybe the stopwatch doesn't matter as much as situational awareness. Maybe what wins games isn't how fast you run but how fast you think. And Sanders proved that with every snap. His poise under pressure wasn't a highlight, it was a trend. His pre-snap reads weren't lucky, they were studied. His ability to elevate those around him wasn't narrative, it was leadership. That's what the Browns saw. And while analysts like Rex Ryan, Tony Gonzalez, and Mary Kay Kitt slowly faded from this particular conversation, softening their tone or disappearing entirely, Carter's apology stood out. Not just because of who he is, but because of how specific and unqualified the apology was. No ego. No attempt to downplay the moment. Just ownership. And that's rare. It also confirms something fans and players have known for a while. The evaluation system is broken. It favors pedigree over poise. Hype over tape. Comfort over context. And in the case of black quarterbacks, the double standards are even more glaring. Confidence gets mistaken for arrogance. Charisma gets mistaken for distraction. Visibility becomes a threat. And for Shedeur, being Deion's son wasn't seen as a strength, it was seen as a warning. As if his lineage somehow made him less self-made, less serious. But the reality? Sanders used that pressure as fuel. He didn't shrink under it, he rose. He took all that noise and blocked it out. No theatrics. Just execution. And the Browns responded. They didn't wait to see what he might become, they watched what he already was. a leader, a field general, a quarterback who didn't need the spotlight, but earned it every time he took the field. That's why Carter's about-face wasn't just a personal pivot, it was a crack in the system. It proved that real credibility doesn't come from being consistent, it comes from being accountable. From changing your stance when the facts demand it. From understanding that sticking to a bad take isn't toughness, it's insecurity. Carter showed what it looks like to admit you missed the mark, and in doing so he validated what Browns fans, players, and the front office already knew. That Shedeur Sanders isn't a gamble. He's not a feel-good story. He's not just a symbol. He's the guy. So where does this leave the rest of the league? On notice. Because the standards just shifted. Quarterback evaluation has a new baseline now. If your scouting report doesn't account for poise, processing, and presence, it's outdated. If you're still leaning on vertical jump numbers and QB DNA, you're missing the point. Shedeur's success redefines what readiness looks like. And the Browns' commitment shows how quickly organizations will pivot when the tape doesn't match the talk. The old rules didn't apply here, and they won't apply to the next Shedeur either. This isn't a trend. It's a reset. Like if you've watched this transformation unfold from the start. Drop your thoughts in the comments, especially if you remember the doubters who are now silent. And subscribe because this is only the beginning. The ceiling hasn't been hit. The real story is just getting started. And now that the dust has settled, one thing's clear. What just happened with Shedeur Sanders isn't just a story about a quarterback. It's about what happens when talent, poise, and preparation expose a system that was never built to see them in the first place. Because while the media spun circles about whether he had the tools, Shedeur was building trust in the only place that matters. Inside that locker room and inside the building. And when the Browns cleared house, fired Kevin Stefanski, installed a new offensive staff and overhauled their approach to suit Sanders' strengths, it wasn't just a personnel decision. It was a declaration. They didn't ask him to adjust to the system. They rebuilt the system to fit him. That's not just endorsement. That's institutional belief. That's saying, we've seen enough. This is our guy and we're going all in. Which, for a second-year quarterback, that's practically unheard of. Especially for one who came in with as much baggage, as much skepticism, as Shedeur did. It wasn't just about his game. It was about who he was, where he came from, and what he represented. And that's what makes this moment so much bigger than a depth chart change. Because for months, really years, analysts like Cris and others positioned Shedeur as a product of hype. A kid playing quarterback. Not a quarterback who could lead grown men. Not a player who could process pre-snap reads or run a complex offense. And definitely not someone who could take over a franchise like Cleveland, a team desperate for identity and stability. But that's exactly what he did. And Carter's apology? That wasn't just a correction, it was an inflection point. It was a public unraveling of how deeply flawed the evaluation process had become. How reliant it still is on outdated concepts of what a quarterback is supposed to look like. How hard it is even now for confident, expressive black quarterbacks to be read through the same lens of leadership and intangibles that others are granted without question. When Carter said he got it wrong, not just about the player but about the leader, that admission cut deeper than he probably knew. Because it peeled back the truth. The NFL scouting machine still struggles to recognize what leadership actually looks like when it's not wrapped in traditional packaging. Shedeur's leadership wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't performative. But it was real. Real enough that a franchise with a history of dysfunction decided to tear it all down and rebuild around his tempo, his command, and his ability to execute under fire. That kind of bet isn't made on emotion. It's made on evidence. And the evidence? It's all over the tape. His ability to manage collapsing pockets. The timing. The calmness. The pre-snap authority. His reads. His rhythm. His trust in the structure around him. These aren't rookie flashes, they're franchise traits. And they showed up consistently no matter how loud the noise got. Shedeur's not playing hero ball. He's not making headlines with viral plays. He's not putting himself above the scheme. He's just doing the job better than anyone else in that building. And that kind of performance doesn't just quiet the critics, it makes them irrelevant. Which is exactly what happened. Dillon Gabriel? Forgotten. Not because he failed, but because Shedeur rendered the competition obsolete. Carter even said it outright, Gabriel should be traded. There's no room for ambiguity now. There's one leader. One identity. One QB. That kind of clarity, that kind of confidence from an organization, changes everything. Because what's being recognized here isn't just potential, it's proof. Proof that command and consistency matter more than prototype. That processing speed matters more than raw measurables. That quarterback play in 2026 is about control, not spectacle. And Shedeur's control? It's unshakable. He didn't defend himself when Carter came for him. He didn't clap back when others called him a system guy. He didn't try to win the internet. He just kept winning reps, kept improving, kept stacking performances. Until eventually, the only thing louder than the criticism was the silence that came when people realized they'd gotten it all wrong. That silence is the sound of a narrative breaking. And Carter wasn't the only one to feel it. But he was the only one to publicly own it. And that matters. Because his apology didn't just reflect on Shedeur, it exposed the entire structure that doubted him. It showed that credibility in sports media isn't about always being right, it's about being honest when you're wrong. And if more analysts followed suit, we might actually get somewhere. Because what Shedeur's rise exposed is how fragile the gatekeeping really is. How much of it depends on personality, on pedigree, on how comfortable a player makes a room full of former quarterbacks feel. And when someone comes along and doesn't fit into that mold, but keeps winning anyway, it breaks the whole illusion. That's what happened here. And now, with the Browns backing him completely, with the system redesigned to suit his strengths, with the other quarterback quietly ushered toward the exit, Sanders has the one thing every quarterback needs but few get: space to lead his way. No looking over his shoulder. No gimmick packages. No whispered doubts. Just full-throated, franchise-level support. And that's the scariest part for everyone who wanted to keep him in a box, because now that box is gone. Burnt. Replaced with something new. And you can already feel the ripple effect. Because every young, talented, confident quarterback who's been told to tone it down, wait their turn, or be more coachable, is now watching this unfold. They're seeing that maybe, just maybe, the rules have changed. That maybe leadership doesn't have to come in one specific tone of voice. That maybe processing speed and field vision matter more than a pro-style background. That maybe, if you're good enough and disciplined enough and consistent enough, you don't have to explain yourself. You can just prove it, like Shedeur did. And here's the thing, the shift isn't theoretical anymore. It's tangible. It's institutional. When the Cleveland Browns reshaped their entire organizational identity around Shedeur Sanders, they didn't just give a quarterback the keys, they handed him the blueprints and said, "Tell us how you want to drive." Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how rare that is in this league, especially for a second-year quarterback, especially one who walked in with every red flag that legacy media loves to inflate. Too confident. Too polished. Too connected to his father. Too media-ready. An HBCU background that, for years, has been unfairly treated as a developmental handicap instead of a developmental advantage. All of it used to dismiss him. And now, every one of those perceived negatives has been redefined as a strength. His background gave him perspective. His polish showed discipline. His confidence revealed resilience. And his refusal to engage in media theatrics? That showed leadership. When Cris Carter stepped forward with that emotionally grounded, unhedged apology, it was more than a personal reckoning. It was symbolic. It was a tear in the fabric of gatekeeping that's defined quarterback evaluation for decades. His admission, that he misread Shedeur not just as a player but as a leader, said what so many in football media still won't, that the lens we use to evaluate talent has been warped by comfort, bias, and nostalgia. And now that lens is cracking. Carter wasn't alone in misjudging Sanders. He was just the first to admit it. Rex Ryan? Quiet. Tony Gonzalez? Softly walking it back. Mary Kay Kitt? Missing from the conversation. The silence says everything. Because when you get loud on the front end, when you call a guy system-made, overhyped, and unfit for a franchise role, then he turns around and becomes the reason an entire organization reboots its football identity, you don't just owe him credit. You owe him a reevaluation of everything you thought you knew. The Browns aren't trying to ease Shedeur into the job. They've cleared the runway. The staff changes? That wasn't a reshuffle. That was a signal. It said, this team is going where he goes. This offense will play to his tempo. This locker room is built around his presence. And if anyone in the building doesn't fit that vision, whether it's Dylan Gabriel or anyone else, they're out. That's not a quarterback being accommodated. That's a quarterback being centered. And Sanders didn't have to politic for it. He didn't have to campaign. His tape did the talking. His reads, his control, his command in the huddle, those were his rebuttal. When critics like Carter threw doubts, Shedeur answered with efficiency. When questions about toughness popped up, he responded with quiet, repeated poise and collapsing pockets. That's the piece people missed. Toughness isn't yelling on the sideline or stiff-arming a linebacker. Is showing up, every snap with the same focus regardless of pressure. It's running the offense on 3rd and long in a 2-minute drill with no panic, no flinch, no forced throws. It's elevating teammates not with speeches but with execution. That's what Shedeur showed. Over and over. And now, with the job officially his and the franchise aligned around his leadership, there's a new baseline for quarterback evaluations. One that isn't impressed by combined metrics or family lineage alone. One that asks, can you run an NFL offense with control? Can you process a defense in real time? Can you be the same guy when everything's falling apart? Shedeur didn't just answer those questions. He made them the new standard. This is what the recalibration looks like. This is why Carter's apology felt seismic. Because it wasn't just a reversal, it was an acknowledgement that sports media as a whole needs to evolve. That the old frameworks, the ones that cast expressive black quarterbacks as liabilities and humble, quiet passers as default leaders, are collapsing under the weight of players like Sanders. Players who don't fit the mold. Players who break it. The narrative shift isn't subtle. It's dramatic. Because now, even the most legacy-driven voices in football are being forced to reckon with what this means. Not just for Sanders but for every quarterback who comes after him. That kid at an HBCU right now, running the table with NFL-level decision-making but getting dismissed because the competition isn't there? He's watching this. That dual-threat quarterback being told he should switch to wide receiver because he's too raw? He's watching. And they're not just seeing success, they're seeing vindication. Shedeur's success isn't just personal. It's structural. And Carter acknowledging that, without qualifications, without watering it down, is part of that structural change. He didn't just say Shedeur surprised him. He said plainly that he judged the wrong things. That he missed the bigger picture. That he failed to see the qualities that actually define a franchise quarterback in 2026. That's credibility. Not being right all the time. But being honest enough to change when the facts change. Meanwhile, the analysts who aren't saying anything? They're making a different kind of statement. One that says they're more interested in protecting their brand than acknowledging the evolution happening in front of them. But the fans see it. The players see it. The Browns definitely see it. And now Shedeur isn't just a starter, he's a case study. So where does this go next? That's the part that should really keep people up at night. Because if this is what Sanders has done in year 2, earned the full faith of a franchise, forced high-level apologies, reshaped the evaluation lens, what happens next? What does year 3 look like? Year 5? What does this mean for the next quarterback who walks in without the approved resume, but with the skill and leadership to take over? That's where the story continues. Because Carter's apology didn't close a chapter, it opened one. It gave permission for other voices in media to recalibrate without shame, to admit when the game outgrows their perspective. And more importantly, to start looking in the right places for the next Shedeur Sanders. And the more you look at it, the more undeniable it becomes. Shedeur Sanders didn't just climb the depth chart, he flipped the entire quarterback conversation on its head. Because what he did wasn't flashy. It wasn't even fast. It was methodical, intentional, rooted in patience and preparation, 2 words that were never associated with his name early on. Back when the dominant narrative was all about how too much attention and too little adversity would catch up to him in the NFL. Except it didn't. He walked into the pressure cooker and didn't flinch. And now the Browns have handed him more than just a playbook. They've handed him the vision. The blueprint for who they want to be. A team that's not reactive but composed. Not desperate but intentional. A team that understands leadership isn't about shouting, it's about stabilizing. And what's wild is how quickly the league is having to recalibrate. Because Shedeur wasn't supposed to be this. Not according to the usual markers. He wasn't a combined darling. His measurements didn't wow anyone. His 40 time didn't light up the scouting reports. And the fact that he played under Dion? That wasn't viewed as mentorship, it was treated like a disqualifier. As if football IQ can't be passed from father to son if the father is too loud, too visible, too unapologetically black. That coded bias was never spoken outright, but it didn't need to be. You could hear it in the constant questions about whether Shedeur was really ready, as if quarterbacks with far less on-field command were somehow more prepared because they played in bigger conferences or came from classic systems. Meanwhile, Sanders was quietly showing what modern quarterbacking actually looks like. Field vision. Pre-snap control. Adjustments on the fly. Anticipation. Pocket manipulation. Leadership by action. And above all, consistency. He gave Cleveland something they haven't had in years, stability. And that's what makes the Browns' decision to build around him not just bold, but logical. Because when you've been wandering in quarterback purgatory for years, and you finally find a player who calms the offense down, gets everyone on the same page and makes the tough throws under pressure, you don't wait. You move. And that's what they did. They moved fast. Fired the coach. Rebuilt the offensive staff. Gave Sanders every structural piece he needed to succeed. They didn't try to force him into an outdated system. They erased the chalkboard and handed him the marker. And when Cris Carter stepped forward with that apology, it was like the last domino fell. 4 months he'd been one of the loudest voices saying Shedeur wasn't it. That he didn't have the traits. That he didn't have the makeup. But now he's saying something completely different. Saying he got it wrong. That he judged too quickly. That he relied too much on the old framework and didn't give enough credit to what was actually happening on the field. That kind of honesty is rare. But it's necessary. Because it's not just about Carter and Sanders, it's about how many others will miss the next quarterback like this because they're too locked into a mold that's already outdated. A mold that values pedigree over presence. That values past templates over current production. And if you're an analyst or a scout or a GM watching this unfold and still clinging to the old language, words like intangibles and game manager and raw talent, you're on borrowed time. Because what Sanders has done is prove that leadership looks different now. It doesn't always wear a suit and speak in cliches. Sometimes it smiles, wears a chain, and calmly commands the field while the media tries to catch up. The story of Shedeur Sanders isn't just about vindication. It's about expansion. Expanding what we allow quarterbacks to be. What we recognize as leadership. What we respect as toughness. If you're watching all of this and realizing that the ground is shifting, that this isn't just a Browns story but a league-wide recalibration, hit that like. If you remember every analyst who loudly doubted him and now suddenly has nothing to say, leave their names in the comments. And if you're ready to follow what comes next, because make no mistake, this is just the beginning, go ahead and subscribe. We'll be right here for every snap.